I spent 15 years building my financial empire from a tiny desk in a strip mall office, working 70-hour weeks, so my family could keep their dream home, and my parents could host their legendary New Year's Eve parties. 3 days before, their biggest celebration of the year, my mother called to tell me I wasn't welcome because my lifestyle choices would embarrass them in front of their church friends and business associates. What my parents discovered the morning after their precious party when they opened their mailbox would change everything they thought they knew about consequences. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing loan applications in my corner office overlooking downtown Riverside. The December sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the awards and certifications lining my walls. Martinez Financial Solutions had grown from a single-person operation 15 years ago to a respected firm with 12 employees and millions in annual loan originations. I had built something real, something lasting, something that helped families achieve their dreams of home ownership. My phone buzzed with Mom's ringtone, the mariachi music I'd programmed as a joke years ago when she complained I never called. Enough. I smiled, expecting her usual pre-party anxiety about whether she'd ordered enough champagne or if the caterers would arrive on time. Mom's New Year's Eve parties were legendary in Riverside. For over 20 years, she and Dad had opened their Maple Street home to nearly 100 guests, transforming their modest ranch house into the social event of the season. "Mija, we need to talk." Mom's voice carried an unusual tension that made me sit up straighter in my leather chair. "What's wrong? Is Dad okay? Did something happen with the party setup?" I minimized the spreadsheet on my computer screen, giving her my full attention. "Your father is fine. The party setup is fine. It's about you attending the party that we need to discuss." Her voice had that formal quality she used when she was about to deliver news she knew I wouldn't like. My stomach dropped slightly. "What do you mean? I've been coming to your New Year's party since I was 12 years old. I already took the day off tomorrow to help with setup, just like every year." "Lisa, honey, you know how much we love you. You know how proud we are of your success with the business." The words came slowly, carefully chosen. "But this year is different. We have some very important guests coming. Pastor Martinez from the church, along with several board members. Your father's biggest commercial landscaping clients will be there. Some of the wives from my Bible study group." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December weather. "Mom, what are you trying to say?" "We think it would be better if you didn't attend this year. Just this once. It's nothing personal, Mija. It's just that some of our friends have very traditional values, and with you bringing David every year, and the way you two live together without being married, it sends the wrong message about our family." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk, trying to process what I was hearing. "You're uninviting me from your New Year's party because I live with my boyfriend?" It's not just about David, though that's part of it. It's about appearances. Pastor Martinez has been counseling us about maintaining a righteous household, and he's mentioned that having unmarried couples in our home during religious celebrations might not align with Christian values. And then there's the business aspect. The Hendersons from Henderson Construction are coming, and you know how conservative they are. Your father is hoping to land their new office complex landscaping contract, and we can't afford to offend them. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the bustling street below. Families hurried along the sidewalks, carrying shopping bags and wearing winter coats, preparing for their own holiday celebrations. Normal families who didn't disinvite their successful daughters from family traditions. "Mom, I'm 34 years old. I own a business that employs 12 people. I've lived with David for 3 years in a committed, loving relationship. We're talking about getting engaged next year. What exactly is so shameful about my life that you need to hide me from your friends?" Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Lisa. It's just one party. You can come over for dinner next week and we'll celebrate privately. But for this particular event, with these particular people, it would be easier if you weren't there. Easier. As if my presence at the family party I'd attended for over 2 decades was an inconvenience to be managed rather than a joy to be celebrated. As if the daughter who had worked herself to exhaustion to build something meaningful was now a liability to their social standing. What about Kevin? Is my brother also being uninvited, or just me? Kevin was my younger brother, by 3 years, currently between jobs and living in mom and dad's converted garage while he figured things out. Kevin is family. He lives here. It's different. I'm family too, Mom. I'm your daughter. A long pause stretched between us. I could hear the muffled sounds of traffic from the street below, the distant hum of conversations from my employees' desks beyond my office door. Normal sounds of a normal workday that had suddenly become anything but normal. Of course you're family, Mija. This isn't about love. This is about what's appropriate for this particular gathering. Pastor Martinez specifically asked us to consider the message we're sending to the younger families in the congregation. The Hendersons have 2 teenage daughters, and Mrs. Henderson mentioned that she's concerned about the examples her girls are seeing in the community. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The full picture began to crystallize. I wasn't just being disinvited from a party. I was being designated as a bad influence, a cautionary tale, someone whose very presence might corrupt impressionable minds or offend conservative sensibilities. The successful businesswoman who had worked 16-hour days to build something meaningful was being reduced to a scandal that needed to be managed. Let me get this straight. The party that I've helped you plan and pay for every year since I started making real money. The party where I've brought expensive wines and covered costs when your budget ran short. The party where I've spent countless hours helping you prepare and clean up. That party is now too good for me because I live with someone I love instead of rushing into marriage to satisfy other people's expectations. Don't be dramatic, Lisa. It's one night. You're acting like we're disowning you. But that's exactly what it felt like. 22 years of New Year's Eve traditions, suddenly severed because my life didn't fit the image they wanted to project. I thought about all the years I'd rushed home from college to help with party preparations. The years I'd driven straight from work still in my business suits to hang streamers and arrange food platters. The years I'd stayed until 3 a.m. helping clean up, making sure Mom didn't have to face the aftermath alone. I thought about the expensive bottle of Dom Perignon I'd already purchased for the midnight toast, sitting in my wine refrigerator at home. The new dress I'd bought specifically for this party, still hanging in my closet with tags attached. The arrangements I'd made with my office manager to handle any emergency calls that might come in while I was celebrating. With family. Have you told Dad about this decision? Or is this coming from Pastor Martinez and your Bible study friends? Another pause. Your father agrees that it's for the best. He's worked very hard to build relationships with these clients, Lisa. The landscaping business has been struggling since the recession, and we can't afford to lose opportunities because of personal complications. Personal complications. That's what I had become to the people who raised me. Not their successful daughter who had achieved the American dream they'd worked so hard to give me access to. Not the child who had earned a college degree they couldn't afford and built a business from nothing. Just a complication that might interfere with their social and economic aspirations. I see. I sat back down in my chair, suddenly feeling exhausted. And what exactly are you planning to tell people? When they ask where I am, I've been at every one of these parties since high school. People will notice I'm missing. We'll figure something out. Maybe say you had to travel for business or that you came down with something. Nothing dramatic. So not only was I being excluded, but my absence would be covered up with lies, as if acknowledging the real reason would be too embarrassing for them to handle. as if admitting they'd chosen their social reputation over their daughter's feelings was more shameful than actually making that choice. I looked around my office, taking in the framed photos of successful mortgage closings, the thank you letters from families I'd helped buy their first homes, the professional awards recognizing my contributions to the community. 15 years of building something meaningful, something that helped people achieve their dreams, and none of it mattered when weighed against my parents' need to appear respectable to their social circle. Mom, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about one party. This is about you deciding that your adult daughter's happiness and dignity matter less than what strangers think about your family. This is about you choosing to exclude me from a family tradition because I don't fit the image you want to project. You're being overdramatic, Lisa. It's just one party. Don't make this into something bigger than it needs to be. But it was bigger. It was about respect and acceptance, and the message that love comes with conditions. It was about the realization that the parents I'd worked so hard to make proud were ashamed of the life I'd built for myself. Not ashamed of failure or irresponsibility or moral failings that actually mattered, but ashamed that I'd chosen to live authentically rather than performing respectability for their social circle. I understand your position, Mom. I think we both know where we stand now. Don't be angry, Mija. Come over for dinner on Sunday and we'll celebrate the new year properly. Just family. Just family. Except family was apparently conditional on whether my presence served their social needs. Family was apparently something that could be edited for public consumption, with inconvenient members hidden away when they didn't fit the desired narrative. After I hung up, I sat in my office chair staring out at the afternoon traffic, trying to process what had just happened. The daughter who had never given her parents a moment's real trouble, who had worked 2 jobs through college to avoid burdening them with debt, who had started her business with a $5,000 loan and built it into something that employed others and served the community, that daughter wasn't good enough to attend the family New Year's party. I thought about David, probably at his engineering firm downtown, completely unaware that he'd just become the reason for my family crisis. David, who brought my parents flowers every time we visited, who helped Dad with yard work without being asked, who listened patiently to Mom's stories about her church activities and remembered details about people he'd only met once. David, who had been nothing but respectful and kind to my family for 3 years, was now being treated as if his presence in my life was scandalous. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents were more concerned about appearing righteous to their church friends than actually practicing the love and acceptance their faith supposedly taught. More worried about what the Hendersons might think than about how their decision would affect their own daughter. More invested in projecting an image of traditional values than in actually valuing their family relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Looking forward to helping. With party set up tomorrow. Should I bring the good champagne or save it for midnight? I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How do you tell someone you love that your parents have decided he's not welcome in their home? How do you explain that the family he's been nothing but kind to has rejected him based on arbitrary moral standards that have nothing to do with his character or your relationship? Instead of responding immediately, I opened my laptop and began reviewing the Martinez family file. Not because I needed to for any business reason, but because I wanted to understand exactly what my parents had at stake in their social performance. What were they so desperate to protect that they were willing to sacrifice their relationship with their daughter? The file told a story I knew but had never examined closely. Mom and Dad's house on Maple Street, purchased 23 years ago when Dad's landscaping business was thriving, and before the housing market became so competitive. A modest 3-bedroom ranch that had been their pride and joy, the symbol of their success in achieving the American dream their own immigrant parents had worked toward. But the recession had hit Dad's business hard. Commercial landscaping contracts dried up as businesses cut costs. Residential clients began doing their own yard work or hiring cheaper competitors. For the past 5 years, Mom and Dad had been struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments. even after refinancing twice to lower their monthly obligations. I scrolled through the payment history, noting the late fees that had accumulated, the missed payments that had been made up just before foreclosure proceedings could begin. My parents were living paycheck to paycheck, desperately trying to maintain the appearance of stability while barely keeping their heads above water financially. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. 6 months ago, Martinez Financial Solutions had purchased the note on my parents' mortgage from their original lender. As part of a portfolio acquisition of distressed loans, my company now held the mortgage on Mom and Dad's house. They didn't know it because the servicing company hadn't changed, and there was no reason for them to be informed about the behind-the-scenes ownership transfer. But I knew. I had personally reviewed and approved the extension they'd requested last month when they'd fallen behind on payments again. I had instructed my loan servicing department to work with them on a modified payment plan that would allow them to keep their home. I had been protecting my parents' financial stability without them ever knowing I was involved. The same daughter they'd just disinvited from their New Year's party was the reason they still had a house to host it in. I leaned back in my chair, the full irony of the situation settling over me like a heavy blanket. My parents were so concerned about maintaining appearances for their social circle that they were willing to exclude their daughter. The daughter who was literally keeping a roof over their heads. The daughter whose financial success and business acumen were the only things standing between them and foreclosure. They wanted to project an image of traditional family values to impress Pastor Martinez and potential clients. They wanted to appear respectable and morally upright to their church friends and business associates. But they were willing to sacrifice actual family relationships to maintain that image. They were more concerned with performing righteousness than practicing it. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the business card of my attorney, someone I'd worked with on countless real estate transactions over the years. Then I thought better of it. This wasn't a decision to make in anger or hurt. This was a decision that required careful consideration of consequences and alternatives. But as I sat there in my successful office, surrounded by evidence of everything I'd built through hard work and determination, I couldn't escape the reality of what had just happened. My parents had decided that their social reputation mattered more than their relationship with me. They had chosen to exclude me from a family tradition because my life didn't conform to their desired image, and they had made that choice while completely unaware that I was the reason they could afford to host their precious party in their precious house with their precious social circle. The daughter they were ashamed of was the one keeping them from losing everything. The afternoon sun shifted lower in the sky, casting long shadows across my office floor. Tomorrow night, while my parents celebrated with their church friends and potential clients, I would be sitting at home, excluded from the family tradition I'd cherished for over 2 decades. Excluded not because of anything I'd done wrong, but because of who I was and how I chose to live my authentic life. But I wouldn't be sitting there powerless. I wouldn't be the victim in this story. If my parents wanted to make choices based on appearances and social expectations, they were going to learn what those choices actually cost. They were going to discover that actions have consequences, and that the daughter they'd taken for granted had more power in this situation than they could possibly imagine. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found my loan servicing manager. It was time to make some business decisions of my own. The rest of that Tuesday evening passed in a blur of conflicted emotions and racing thoughts. I drove home to my Hillcrest neighborhood in silence, my usual NPR podcasts feeling too cheerful for my current state of mind. The December air was crisp and clear, with Christmas lights still twinkling on houses throughout the upscale community I'd worked so hard to afford. Each decorated home seemed to mock me with its display of family warmth and holiday togetherness. David's BMW was already in our driveway when I pulled in, which meant he'd left his engineering firm early to help with what he thought would be party preparations. The irony stung. While I was being uninvited from my family's celebration, he was adjusting his schedule to support what he believed was our shared obligation to help my parents. I found him in our kitchen, sleeves rolled up, organizing the appetizer, ingredients we'd planned to contribute to tomorrow's setup. His dark hair was slightly mussed from running his hands through it, a habit he'd developed when concentrating on detailed tasks. After 3 years together, I knew his expressions well enough to read the focused contentment on his face as he worked. He genuinely enjoyed helping my family with their events, taking pride in being useful and contributing to their success. "Hey, beautiful," he said, without looking up from the cutting board where he was julienning vegetables. "I stopped by that specialty store you mentioned and got those fancy olives your mom loves. Figured we could make that Mediterranean spread she's always asking about but never attempts herself." The casual affection in his voice, the way he'd taken initiative to make my mother happy, the complete obliviousness to what had transpired that afternoon, all of it hit me like a wave of fresh grief. Here was a man who had spent his own money and time to bring joy to people who had just declared him unwelcome in their home. "David, we need to talk." I set my purse down on the granite countertop, trying to find words for a conversation I'd never imagined having. He looked up then, his expression shifting from contentment to concern as he registered something in my tone. "What's wrong? Did something happen at work? You look like you've seen a ghost." I poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle we'd opened the night before, buying time to organize my thoughts. How do you tell someone you love that your family has rejected them based on prejudices that have nothing to do with their character? How do you explain that people he'd tried so hard to win over had been judging him by standards he never knew existed? My mom called today about the New Year's party. I took a sip of wine, the Pinot Grigio doing nothing to ease the bitter taste in my mouth. "There's been a change of plans." David set down his knife, giving me his full attention. "What kind of change? Did they decide to cater instead of cooking themselves? I know your mom's been stressed about the menu. They've decided we're not invited this year." The words came out flat, emotionless, because letting feeling into them would have broken something inside me that I wasn't ready to repair. His confusion was immediate and genuine. "Not invited? But it's your family's party. You've been going since you were a kid. Did something happen? Are they scaling back because of COVID concerns or budget issues?" "No, David, they're not scaling back. They're having the same party with the same 100 guests they always invite. They just don't want us there. Specifically, they don't want you there, and they don't want me there if I'm with you." I watched, his face as the implication sank in. David was a thoughtful man, someone who analyzed problems from multiple angles before drawing conclusions. I could see him running through possibilities, trying to understand what he might have done to offend my parents or create this situation. "Lisa, I don't understand. Your parents have always been kind to me. Your mom texts me recipes. Your dad asks for my help with his computer problems. Last month, they invited us to dinner twice in 1 week. What could have changed so suddenly?" This was the part I'd been dreading. Explaining that nothing had changed except my parents' willingness to prioritize their social image over their family relationships. Making David understand that he'd been judged and found wanting, not for anything he'd done, but for what our relationship represented to people whose opinions my parents valued more than our feelings. I sat down at our kitchen island, gesturing for him to join me. Mom said they have important guests coming this year. Church leadership, potential business clients, people with very traditional values. She said our living together unmarried sends the wrong message about their family. David was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a hurt I'd rarely heard from him. "So after 3 years of being welcomed into their home, of helping with yard work and listening to your mom's stories and bringing flowers to your dad when he was in the hospital, I'm suddenly not good enough because we haven't had a wedding ceremony. It's not about you not being good enough. It's about them being more concerned with appearances than authenticity. It's about them valuing the opinions of people they barely know more than the feelings of people they supposedly love." But even as I said it, I could see the damage was done. David was someone who took relationships seriously, who invested emotionally in the people he cared about. He'd spent 3 years building connections with my family, and now he was learning that all of it had been conditional on meeting standards nobody had bothered to communicate. "Have you told them we're planning to get engaged next year? That we're not just casually living together, but building toward marriage?" I had to look away. "David, you don't understand. This isn't really about marriage. This is about them wanting to control how their family looks to the outside world. If we got married tomorrow, there would be something else. Maybe your family background, or your career, or the fact that you're not Hispanic, or the way you don't attend their church. The goalposts will always move because this isn't actually about meeting their standards. It's about power and image management." He stood up abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked our backyard. We'd spent countless evenings on that patio, grilling dinner and talking about our future plans. Plans that had always included being part of my extended family, contributing to their celebrations, building relationships across generations. So, what happens now? Do we just accept that I'm persona non grata at family events? Do you go alone and pretend we don't live together? Do we both stay away and let them explain our absence however they want? These were the questions I'd been asking myself since the phone call ended. The practical implications of my parents' decision extended far beyond one party. They were essentially asking me to compartmentalize my life, to separate my romantic relationship from my family relationships, to choose between the man I loved and the family that raised me. I don't know, David. I honestly don't know. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept fitfully beside me. Every few minutes he would shift position or make small sounds that suggested his dreams were troubled. I'd disrupted his sense of belonging and security, and there was no way to undo that damage even if my parents reversed their decision tomorrow. I found myself thinking about the timeline of my relationship with my family, trying to identify when things had begun to shift. When had I become someone whose choices needed to be managed rather than celebrated? When had my success in building a life I was proud of become a source of embarrassment rather than pride? The signs had been there if I'd chosen to see them. The subtle comments about when David and I would make things official. The way Mom would introduce us to church friends as Lisa and her friend David, instead of acknowledging our relationship directly. The questions about whether we were attending services together, as if our spiritual life was any of their business. The hints about how nice it would be if I found someone from a good Catholic family. I'd dismissed these moments as generational differences, assuming that time and familiarity would help my parents accept the relationship as it was. I'd believed that their love for me would eventually override their discomfort with my choices. Instead, their discomfort had grown into something that required my exclusion from family gatherings. But lying there in the dark, I realized this wasn't just about David or our living arrangement. This was about my parents' increasing inability to accept that I'd grown into an adult with my own values and priorities. It was about their need to maintain control over how their family was perceived, even if that meant sacrificing honest relationships with their adult children. I thought about Kevin, sleeping in their converted garage, unemployed and directionless at 31. Kevin, who was still welcome at family gatherings despite contributing nothing to household expenses and having no clear plans for his future. Kevin, whose presence never seemed to concern them when it came to impressing church friends or business associates. The double standard was glaring and painful. Kevin's failures were private family matters that could be managed and explained away. My success was public and visible, which meant my personal choices were subject to scrutiny and judgment. I'd built something that reflected well on their parenting, but I'd also made choices that challenged their worldview. Apparently, the latter mattered more than the former. Wednesday morning brought no clarity, only a deeper sense of loss and betrayal. I went through my work routine mechanically, reviewing loan applications and meeting with clients while my mind remained stuck on the previous day's conversation. My assistant Maria noticed my distraction and asked twice if I was feeling well. "Just family drama," I told her, not wanting to elaborate on the specifics. "Nothing that affects work." But that wasn't entirely true. The revelation about my parents' mortgage had been haunting me since I'd discovered it the day before. Every time I looked at a loan file or approved a payment plan, I thought about the irony of my situation. The daughter who wasn't good enough to attend the family party was the one keeping the family from losing their home. I'd built Martinez Financial Solutions with the goal of helping families achieve stability and security. I'd seen too many people lose their homes due to circumstances beyond their control, and I'd made it my mission to find creative solutions that kept families together and roofs over their heads. The idea that my own parents might be in that situation without even knowing I was helping them felt surreal. Around noon, I received a text from Mom that made my stomach clench. "Mija, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Maybe we were too hasty. Could you and David come over for dinner tonight so we can talk things through?" The message should have brought relief, but instead it felt manipulative. After 24 hours to think about their decision, after presumably discussing it with Dad and maybe realizing how it would look to other family members, they were reconsidering. Not because they'd genuinely changed their perspective, but because the practical implications of excluding me were becoming apparent. I showed the text to David when I got home that evening. He read it twice before responding, his expression thoughtful but guarded. "What do you think they want to discuss?" he asked. "I think they want to find a compromise that lets them maintain their social image while keeping me from being completely estranged. Maybe they'll suggest we come to the party but leave before the church people arrive, or attend but avoid public. Displays of affection. Some middle ground that makes everyone moderately uncomfortable instead of completely miserable." David was quiet for several minutes, considering this possibility. Finally, he said, "Lisa, I don't think I want to negotiate for acceptance from people who've already decided I'm not good enough. If your parents want to include us in family events, they need to include us as we are, not as edited versions of ourselves that meet their approval standards." His response surprised me with its firmness. David was typically someone who sought compromise and worked to find solutions that satisfied everyone involved. Hearing him draw a clear boundary felt both supportive and somehow final, as if we were acknowledging that some relationships couldn't be salvaged through goodwill and effort alone. So what do I tell them? Tell them the truth, that we're not interested in conditional acceptance or partial inclusion. That family relationships shouldn't require us to hide who we are or apologize for choices we're proud of. I spent an hour crafting my response to Mom's text, writing and rewriting until I found words that were firm, but not cruel, clear, but not inflammatory. "Mom, I appreciate you reaching out, but I don't think dinner will solve the fundamental issue here. You and Dad have decided that your social reputation matters more than your relationship with me. That's your choice to make, but it's not something we can compromise away over a meal." Her response came quickly, and I could practically hear the frustration in her typed words. "Lisa, you're being stubborn and dramatic. We're trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Can't you meet us halfway?" But there was no halfway between acceptance and rejection. There was no middle ground between including your daughter in family celebrations and excluding her because her lifestyle might offend strangers. There was no compromise between loving someone as they are and loving them only when they conform to your expectations. That night, David and I made a decision that felt both liberating and terrifying. Instead of spending New Year's Eve wondering what we were missing at my parents' party, we would create our own celebration. We invited his sister Rachel and her husband Mark, along with 2 couples from our friend group who didn't have family obligations. We planned a dinner party that would be intimate and authentic, filled with people who accepted us exactly as we were. "It feels strange," I admitted to David as we planned the menu. "I've never not been at my parents' house on New Year's Eve. I don't even know what I'll do with myself when midnight comes, and I'm not there for the traditional toast and the mariachi music and my mom's tears about another year passing." "We'll create new traditions," he said simply. "Better ones. Ones based on love instead of judgment." But even as I agreed, I felt the weight of what we were losing. 22 years of shared memories, of family traditions that connected me to my history and my identity. My parents weren't just excluding me from a party. They were severing connections that had shaped who I was and how I understood my place in the world. Thursday brought another complication I hadn't anticipated. Kevin called me at work, his voice carrying a confusion that reminded me of when we were children, and he needed help understanding something the adults were discussing. "Lisa, what's going on with you and Mom and Dad? Mom's been crying on and off since yesterday, and Dad keeps muttering about ungrateful children. They said you're not coming to the party tomorrow, but they won't explain why." I felt a surge of anger at my parents for putting Kevin in the middle of their decision. He had enough challenges managing his own life without being forced to navigate family drama he didn't understand and hadn't created. "They uninvited me, Kevin. They decided that having David and me at the party would send the wrong message to their church friends and business associates." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched long enough that I wondered if the yee call had dropped. Finally, Kevin said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're the most successful person in our family. You employ more people than Dad's business ever has. You own a house that's worth more than they paid for theirs. And they're embarrassed by you?" His reaction validated something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. The absurdity of the situation went beyond hurt feelings or family dynamics. My parents were rejecting their most accomplished child to impress people who would probably be more impressed by my success than scandalized by my living arrangement. It's not about logic, Kevin. It's about appearances and control and values that don't actually align with how they've raised us to live. "Well, it's stupid," he repeated. "And if you're not going to be there, I don't really want to be there either. The party won't be the same without you." Kevin's loyalty meant more to me than I could express, but I didn't want him to sacrifice his own family relationships because of my situation. "Don't do anything dramatic, Kevin. This is between me and them. You still live there, and you don't need to make your situation more complicated." "My situation is already complicated, Lisa. At least you have your own life and your own home and your own business. I'm 31 years old sleeping in a converted garage, and depending on parents who apparently think I'm more acceptable company than their successful daughter." After I hung up, I sat in my office trying to process this new layer of family dysfunction. My parents were so concerned about projecting an image of traditional family values that they were willing to exclude the child who best exemplified the work ethic and determination they'd tried to instill in both of us. Meanwhile, the child who was actually struggling to meet basic adult expectations remained welcome because his failures were private rather than public. The whole situation revealed something troubling about how my parents understood success and morality. They were more comfortable with Kevin's dependence and lack of direction than with my independence and unconventional choices. They could explain away his struggles as temporary setbacks, but they couldn't explain away my decisions as anything other than reflections of their parenting and family values. That evening, I made a decision that had been building since Tuesday's phone call. I opened my laptop and began drafting a letter to my parents. Not the kind of emotional response I'd been crafting in my head, but a business communication that laid out facts and consequences in clear, professional language. "Dear Mom and Dad," I began, then stopped and started over. This wasn't a personal letter from their daughter. This was a business communication from the president of Martinez Financial Solutions to the holders of a mortgage my company serviced. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Martinez," I wrote instead, This letter serves as formal notice regarding the mortgage loan on your property at 1247 Maple Street, Riverside, CA. As you may not be aware, Martinez Financial Solutions acquired your loan as part of a portfolio purchase 6 months ago. I went on to explain that while they had been receiving modified payment terms and extensions as a courtesy, those accommodations were not guaranteed to continue indefinitely. I detailed the current status of their account, including late fees that had been waived and payment deferrals that had been approved without the usual qualification requirements. Going forward, I continued, all loan modifications and payment accommodations will be subject to standard underwriting criteria and business justifications. Personal relationships will no longer be a factor in servicing decisions for this account. I printed the letter on official company letterhead and prepared it for mailing with the standard certified mail procedures we used for all formal loan communications. Then I sat staring at the envelope, realizing I was about to cross a line that would fundamentally change my relationship with my parents forever. But they had already crossed that line when they decided their social reputation mattered more than their relationship with me. They had already chosen to prioritize the opinions of acquaintances over the feelings of their daughter. They had already decided that conditional love was better than no love at all, at least from their perspective. The letter would be delivered on Saturday, the day after their precious New Year's Eve party. While they were recovering from their celebration with church friends and potential clients, they would discover that their decision to exclude me had consequences they never anticipated. They would learn that the daughter they'd taken for granted had more power in their lives than they'd ever imagined. I sealed the envelope and scheduled it for pickup the next morning. Then I opened a bottle of the expensive champagne I'd bought for their party and toasted the new year early, celebrating not what I was losing, but what I was finally willing to claim for myself. New Year's Eve morning arrived with the kind of crisp winter sunshine that made Southern California feel deceptively cheerful. I woke up naturally at 7, without the usual alarm that would have gotten me to my parents' house early for setup duties. The silence in our bedroom felt strange and hollow, missing the familiar anticipation that had marked this day for over 2 decades. David was already up, moving quietly through our morning routine so as not to disturb what he probably assumed was much-needed sleep. I could hear him in the kitchen, making coffee with the expensive espresso machine we'd bought ourselves as a Christmas gift. The domestic sounds that usually comforted me felt foreign today, as if I was experiencing them from outside my own life. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 12 text messages, all from Kevin. The messages started around midnight and grew increasingly frantic as the night progressed. "Lisa, you need to call me. Something's wrong with Mom. She's locked herself in the bathroom and won't come out. Dad's threatening to cancel the party. Please call me back." I dialed Kevin's number, and he answered before the first ring finished. "Thank God," he said, his voice raw with exhaustion. "I've been calling you for hours." "I'm sorry, I had my phone on silent. What's happening?" "It's complete chaos. Here. Mom found out about the mortgage thing somehow, and she's having what I think might be a panic attack. Dad's acting like it's the end of the world. They keep talking about how you've betrayed the family and destroyed their lives, but they won't explain exactly what happened." My stomach dropped. The letter wasn't supposed to be delivered until tomorrow. How had they found out about the mortgage situation a full day early? "Kevin, slow down. What exactly did they find out, and how?" "I don't know all the details, but apparently Mrs. Rodriguez from down the street works for some title company, and she saw your business name on some paperwork. She mentioned it to Mom yesterday at the grocery store, thinking it was interesting that you were involved in their mortgage somehow. Mom came home and started going through their loan documents, and that's when everything exploded." Mrs. Rodriguez. I should have anticipated that someone in their neighborhood might have connections to the real estate industry. Riverside was a small enough community that business relationships often overlapped with personal ones. What I'd intended as a controlled revelation after their party had become an uncontrolled crisis before it. "Is Mom okay? Do they need medical attention?" I don't think it's that serious, but she keeps saying you've been lying to them and manipulating them. Dad's mostly angry, but Mom seems more scared than anything. She keeps asking how long you've known about their financial problems and why you didn't tell them. The irony of the situation was almost unbearable. My parents were upset that I'd been helping them secretly, while simultaneously upset that I'd been excluded from their family celebration. They wanted the benefits of my financial assistance without acknowledging my role in providing it. They wanted to maintain their independence and pride while depending on my intervention to keep their home. Kevin, I need you to tell them something. Can you write this down? Hold on, let me get a pen. Tell them that Martinez Financial Solutions has been servicing their loan professionally and appropriately. Tell them that any payment modifications or extensions they've received have been based on standard business practices, not personal favoritism. And tell them that their current payment plan remains in effect through the end of January, regardless of any family disagreements. I could hear Kevin writing, his pen scratching against paper. Lisa, they're going to want to talk to you directly. Mom keeps saying she needs to apologize for something, and Dad keeps saying he needs to understand what you want from them. What I wanted was simple and impossible. I wanted parents who were proud of my success instead of embarrassed by my choices. I wanted a family that valued authenticity over appearances. I wanted to belong somewhere without having to hide parts of myself that didn't fit the approved narrative. Tell them I'm not available today, Kevin. Tell them we can discuss the mortgage details next week if they want, but today I have other commitments. After I hung up, David found me sitting on our back patio, still in my pajamas, watching the morning light play across our garden. He handed me a cup of coffee and settled into the chair beside me, waiting for me to explain the phone call he'd obviously overheard. They found out about the mortgage, I said simply. How? Neighborhood gossip network. Someone saw my company name on paperwork and mentioned it to my mother, thinking it was interesting news. Mom went digging through their loan documents and put the pieces together. David sipped his coffee thoughtfully. How do you feel about that? It was such a David question, focusing on my emotional response rather than the practical implications. After 3 years together, he knew that I processed problems by first understanding how they affected me internally, then working outward to solutions and strategies. Relieved, I think. I was dreading having to explain it to them eventually. At least now it's out in the open, even if the timing isn't what I planned. And how do you think they're handling it? Badly. Kevin says Mom's having some kind of breakdown about being deceived and manipulated. Dad's apparently furious that I've been in a position of power over their financial situation without their knowledge. They're both probably terrified about what it means for their housing security. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching a family of quail make their way across our yard. The birds moved with purpose and unity, the adults keeping careful watch while the juveniles explored their surroundings. It struck me as a healthy model of family behavior: protection without control, guidance without manipulation. So, what happens now? David asked. Now we have the conversation I've been avoiding since Tuesday. The one where I explained to my parents that actions have consequences and that their decision to exclude me from family events has implications they didn't consider. Around noon, my phone rang with Mom's number. I let it go to voicemail, not ready for the emotional intensity that conversation would require. When I played the message back, her voice was small and shaky, nothing like the confident woman who had uninvited me from the family party 3 days earlier. Mija, please call me back. I know you must be angry about what happened yesterday, and you have every right to be. But we need to understand what's happening with the house. Kevin said you're not available today, but this is an emergency. Please, I'm begging you to call me back. The desperation in her voice tugged at something. Deep in my chest, the part of me that had always been the responsible daughter, the one who fixed problems and managed crises, But I recognized that responding to her panic would reset the dynamic we'd been operating under for years. It would confirm that my role in the family was to provide solutions while accepting whatever treatment they chose to give me in return. Instead, I called my loan servicing manager, Patricia, and asked her to contact my parents directly to address their concerns about the mortgage status. Patricia was professional and knowledgeable, someone who could provide clear information, without the emotional complications that would come with my direct involvement. Tell them that their account is current and that there are no immediate concerns about their payment status, I instructed. If they have questions about future modifications or want to discuss refinancing options, they can schedule an appointment through normal business channels. Are you sure you don't want to handle this personally? Patricia asked. I mean, they're your parents. That's exactly why I can't handle it personally right now. There are too many other factors involved. They need to understand that this is a business relationship, not a family favor. My phone continued ringing throughout the afternoon. Mom, Dad, Kevin, even my Aunt Carmen, who had apparently been recruited to convince me to talk to my parents. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the preparations for our own New Year's Eve gathering. David and I spent the afternoon cooking together, preparing dishes that reflected our actual tastes and preferences rather than trying to accommodate traditional expectations. We made Vietnamese spring rolls, David's specialty from a cooking class he'd taken before we met. I prepared ceviche using a recipe I'd learned from a Peruvian client who'd become a friend. We opened expensive wine and listened to music that made us happy, creating the kind of celebration we actually wanted instead of the one we were expected to provide. Our guests began arriving around 6. Rachel and Mark brought champagne and stories about their recent vacation to Costa Rica. Our friends Jake and Miranda contributed appetizers and enthusiastic curiosity about why we weren't at my family's traditional party. I gave them a simplified explanation, focusing on scheduling conflicts rather than emotional drama. As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't experienced at family gatherings in years. There was no need to monitor conversations for potentially offensive topics. No pressure to present an edited version of our relationship. No underlying tension about whether our presence was truly welcome. Everyone at our table genuinely wanted to be there, and everyone was accepted exactly as they were. "This is really nice," Rachel commented as we lingered over dessert. "More intimate than those huge parties where you spend the whole night making small talk with people you barely know." I thought about my parents' party happening simultaneously across town, probably reaching its peak energy as midnight approached. 100 guests filling their modest house, most of them people Mom and Dad saw only at church or community events. Conversations focused on polite pleasantries and careful navigation of potentially controversial topics. Everyone performing their best social selves while avoiding anything too personal or authentic. I used to think bigger parties were better, I admitted. More people meant more energy, more celebration. But I'm realizing that quality matters more than quantity. I'd rather have 6 people who actually care about me than 60 people who are just being polite. As we approached midnight, David pulled out his phone to find a countdown broadcast. We gathered in our living room, glasses of champagne in hand, watching the final seconds of the year tick away on the screen. When the moment arrived, we toasted to new beginnings and authentic relationships, to the courage to create the life we actually wanted instead of the one others expected us to live. David kissed me as the clock struck 12, and for the first time in days, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. We were building something real together, something based on mutual respect, an authentic connection rather than social expectations and family obligations. After our guests left, I helped David clean up while we debriefed the evening. "That was perfect," I told him as we loaded the dishwasher. "I can't remember the last time I enjoyed New Year's Eve that much." "It felt like us," he agreed. "Not us trying to fit into someone else's idea of what we should be, just us being ourselves." My phone had been silent for most of the evening, but as we prepared for bed, I noticed several missed calls and messages that had accumulated during our celebration. Most were from Kevin, providing updates on the family party that grew more concerning as the night progressed. "Party's pretty tense," his first message read. "Mom keeps asking people if they've seen you, and Dad's been drinking more than usual." An hour later, "Mom told Mrs. Henderson that you had a business emergency. Mrs. Henderson asked what kind of business you're in, and Mom got flustered and changed the subject." Near midnight, "Pastor Martinez asked Dad about your absence, and Dad said something about family obligations that made no sense. I think people are starting to figure out that something's wrong." The final message, sent after midnight. "Mom spent the countdown crying in the kitchen. I found her there after everyone toasted. She said she's made a terrible mistake, but she won't explain what she means." Dad's passed out in his recliner. "This is the worst New Year's Eve we've ever had." Reading Kevin's messages, I felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. My parents had gotten their perfect party with their perfect guest list, free from the embarrassment of their unconventional daughter and her unmarried boyfriend. But the absence they'd created had cast a shadow over their celebration, making it impossible to fully enjoy what they'd thought they wanted. The next morning brought the certified letter I'd sent before learning about their early discovery of the mortgage situation. Kevin called to report that Dad had signed for it with shaking hands, his face pale as he recognized the official business correspondence from my company. "He's been staring at it for 20 minutes without opening it," Kevin reported. "Mom keeps asking what it says, but he won't read it out loud." "Kevin, the letter just formalizes what Patricia already told them yesterday. Their mortgage is current, and they have no immediate concerns. But going forward, any payment modifications will need to go through standard business channels instead of being handled as family accommodations." "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means they'll need to qualify for assistance based on their actual financial situation, not receive special treatment because they're my parents. If they fall behind on payments, they'll need to demonstrate hardship and provide documentation like any other borrower. They won't be able to just assume I'll fix their problems quietly." Kevin was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Lisa, are you punishing them for what happened earlier this week?" The question stung because it forced me to examine my own motivations. Was I using my financial leverage to retaliate against my parents for rejecting me? Was I conflating business decisions with personal hurt in a way that was unfair to everyone involved? "I'm establishing appropriate boundaries," I said finally. "For 3 years, I've been secretly managing their financial problems while they remained unaware of my involvement. That arrangement was unhealthy for everyone. They deserve to understand their true financial situation, and I deserve to have business relationships that aren't complicated by family drama." "But you're still going to help them if they really need it, right?" That was the question I'd been avoiding since this whole situation began. How much responsibility did I have? For my parents' financial security? How much should family obligation factor into business decisions? Where was the line between appropriate boundaries and vindictive punishment? "Kevin, if Mom and Dad face foreclosure, I won't let them lose their home. But I also won't continue to enable their financial irresponsibility by providing assistance. They don't know they're receiving. They need to understand the real consequences of their choices, both financial and personal." The conversation with Kevin clarified something important for me. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about honesty and accountability. My parents had been making decisions based on incomplete information about their financial reality. They'd chosen to exclude me from family events while depending on my financial intervention to maintain their lifestyle. That arrangement benefited no one in the long term. Sunday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. I was working in our garden, pruning the rose bushes David and I had planted the previous spring, when I heard a car door slam in our driveway. Through the side gate, I could see Dad's old pickup truck, the same Ford he'd been driving for 15 years, now looking worn and slightly pathetic parked behind our newer vehicles. Dad appeared at the gate, looking older than I'd ever seen him. His usual confident posture was gone, replaced by something that resembled defeat. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes red-rimmed from either crying or drinking, or both. "Mija," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" I set down my pruning shears and walked to the gate, not opening it but not turning away either. "What do you want to discuss, Dad?" "I want to understand what's happening. With the house, with the mortgage, with our family. I feel like I'm losing everything, and I don't know how we got here." The vulnerability in his voice was something I'd rarely heard from him. Dad had always been the strong one, the provider, the decision-maker who handled problems through determination and hard work. Seeing him uncertain and frightened felt like witnessing the collapse of something fundamental about how our family had always operated. "Dad, you're not losing everything. Your mortgage is current, your house is secure, and your family relationships can be repaired if you're willing to do the work. But you own our mortgage. Our daughter owns our house. How did we not know that? How long have you been controlling our financial situation without telling us?" I opened the gate then, gesturing for him to follow me to our patio table. This conversation required more space and privacy than we could have standing at the fence line. "I haven't been controlling your financial situation, Dad. I've been helping you manage it. There's a difference." "How long?" he repeated. "My company acquired your mortgage 6 months ago as part of a portfolio purchase. I've been aware of your payment difficulties for the past year, and I've been ensuring that you received accommodations and extensions that might not have been available through other servicers." Dad put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. "We've been taking charity from our own daughter without knowing it. You've been receiving business accommodations from a financial services company. The fact that I own that company doesn't make it charity. But you did it because we're your parents." "I did it because you're my parents, and because it was good business. Foreclosure benefits no one. Keeping families in their homes is literally what my company exists to do." We sat in silence for several minutes, Dad processing information that clearly challenged his understanding of our family dynamics. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression that mixed gratitude with something that looked like shame. "Your mother wants to apologize for what happened this week. She knows we made a mistake with the party invitation. Dad, the party invitation is the least of our problems. The party was just a symptom of larger issues about respect and acceptance and conditional love. We do love you, Mija. We've always loved you. I know you love me, but you love me with conditions and limitations that make it hard for me to be myself around you. You love the version of me that fits your expectations, but you struggle with the parts of me that don't conform to your values." Dad was quiet, considering this observation. "Maybe that's true. Maybe we've been trying to make you into someone you're not." "I don't need you to change who you are, Dad. I just need you to accept who I am. I need to be able to bring David to family events without feeling like we're being tolerated rather than welcomed. I need to know that my life choices don't embarrass you so much that you hide me from your friends." "We're not embarrassed by you, Lisa. We're proud of everything you've accomplished." "Then why did you disinvite me from the New Year's party? Why did you decide that my presence would send the wrong message to your church friends?" Dad's face crumpled then, the careful composure he'd been maintaining throughout our conversation finally breaking down. "Because we were scared. Because Pastor Martinez has been preaching about the importance of traditional family values, and some of the people in our congregation have been questioning our parenting because you and Kevin are both living unconventional lives. Because the Hendersons represent a contract that could save the landscaping business, and we didn't want to risk offending them." The honesty of his admission was both heartbreaking and infuriating. My parents had chosen to exclude me from family celebrations because they were afraid of losing social approval and business opportunities. They had prioritized the opinions of acquaintances over the feelings of their daughter, and they had done so out of fear rather than conviction. Dad, what kind of people judge a family based on their adult children's living arrangements? What kind of Christians exclude family members to maintain appearances? What kind of business associates would end a relationship because you have a successful daughter who lives with her boyfriend? I don't know, he said quietly. I don't know. And I'm starting to think we've been worried about the wrong things. As we talked, I realized that my parents' behavior hadn't been driven by genuine moral convictions or deeply held family values. It had been driven by insecurity and fear of judgment from a community that might not have been judging them as harshly as they imagined. They had created a crisis in our family to solve a problem that might not have existed outside their own. Anxieties. Dad, I want you to know that your mortgage situation won't be affected by our family disagreements. Patricia from my office will continue to work with you on payment plans and modifications as needed. But I won't be involved in those decisions directly anymore. You'll need to work with my staff through normal business channels. Is that punishment for what we did? It's protection for all of us. Our family relationships and business relationships need to have clear boundaries. You deserve to understand your true financial situation, and I deserve to have professional relationships that aren't complicated by family drama. When Dad left that afternoon, I felt emotionally drained but oddly hopeful. We had talked more honestly about our family dynamics than we had in years. The conversation hadn't solved everything, but it had established a foundation for rebuilding our relationship on more authentic terms. That evening, I called Kevin to check on how Mom was handling the revelations about the mortgage and our family tensions. She's calmer today, he reported. Still confused about a lot of things, but not panicking anymore. She keeps asking if you'll forgive her for the party thing. What do you think, Kevin? Do you think they've learned anything from this experience? I think they've learned that their successful daughter has more power than they realized. Whether they've learned to respect that power or just fear it remains to be seen. Kevin's assessment was probably accurate. Change would be gradual, and setbacks were likely. But for the first time since Tuesday's phone call, I felt like authentic communication was possible between me and my parents. The crisis had forced conversations that might never have happened otherwise, and those conversations had revealed truths that needed to be acknowledged. As I prepared for the work week ahead, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 5 days. The daughter who had been excluded from her family's New Year's celebration was now in control of her family's housing security. The relationship dynamics that had seemed fixed and unchangeable had been completely restructured. The parents who had taken my support for granted now understood that their daughter's assistance came with expectations about respect and inclusion. The new year was beginning with clarity about boundaries, consequences, and the difference between conditional and unconditional love. It was beginning with honest conversations about family values and authentic relationships, and it was beginning with the understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. The first week of January passed in an uncomfortable limbo that felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. My parents hadn't attempted any direct contact since Dad's visit on Sunday, but Kevin provided regular updates that painted a picture of two people struggling to understand how their world had shifted so dramatically in such a short time. Mom keeps talking about calling you, Kevin reported during one of our evening check-ins. She'll pick up the phone, dial half your number, then hang up and say she doesn't know what to say. Dad's been obsessively checking the mail every day, like he's expecting more official letters from your company. I felt sympathy for their confusion, but I also recognized that they needed time to process the reality of our changed dynamic. For years, they had been the parents with the power to include or exclude, to approve or disapprove, to set terms for family relationships. Now, they were discovering that their adult daughter had her own form of power, and that their choices could have consequences they hadn't anticipated. Work provided a welcome distraction from family drama. January was always our busiest month, with people looking to refinance after holiday spending or take advantage of New Year rate changes. I threw myself into client meetings and loan reviews, finding comfort in problems that could be solved with financial expertise and professional competence. On Thursday afternoon, Patricia knocked on my office door with an expression that immediately put me on alert. As my loan servicing manager, she typically handled routine account issues without needing my direct input. When she requested face-to-face meetings, it usually meant complications that required executive decision-making. "We need to discuss the Martinez account," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk with a folder thick with documentation. "What kind of complications?" "Your father called this morning requesting an emergency meeting to discuss mortgage modification options. When I scheduled him for next week, he became agitated and insisted on speaking with someone in authority immediately. He seemed to think that because he's your father, he should receive expedited service." I sighed, recognizing Dad's approach to problems that made him uncomfortable. When faced with situations beyond his control, he often became demanding and insistent, as if volume and persistence could substitute for actual solutions. "What exactly is he requesting?" Patricia consulted her notes. "He wants to refinance the entire mortgage at current market rates, extend the term to reduce monthly payments, and establish a line of credit secured by the property's equity. Essentially, he wants to restructure their entire debt situation." "And what did your preliminary analysis show?" "That's where it gets complicated. Based on their current income and debt-to-income ratio, they wouldn't qualify for most of what he's requesting through conventional underwriting. Their landscaping business income has been irregular. They have significant credit card debt, and your father's age makes a 30-year refinance unlikely to be approved by most lenders." I studied the financial documentation Patricia had compiled, seeing my parents' situation with the cold clarity of professional analysis rather than filial emotion. Dad's landscaping business was barely breaking even most months, dependent on seasonal contracts that provided irregular income. Mom's part-time bookkeeping work contributed modestly but inconsistently. Together, they were managing their basic expenses, but any unexpected costs or income disruptions put them at immediate risk. "However," Patricia continued, "if we were to approve the modifications as portfolio loans kept on our books rather than selling them to secondary markets, we could structure something that meets their needs while providing reasonable security for the company." "At what risk level?" "Moderate to high. The property has sufficient equity to secure the loans, and your parents have a 23-year payment history that shows commitment to keeping the mortgage current even when it required sacrifice. The risk is primarily in their income stability and their advancing age." I found myself in the exact situation I'd been trying to avoid. My parents needed financial assistance that went beyond standard business practices, and I was in a position to provide it through my company. But approving loans that wouldn't meet conventional underwriting standards would mean using my business to subsidize my family's lifestyle. Exactly the kind of boundary blurring that had created problems in the first place. "Patricia, if these were any other clients with identical financial profiles, what would your recommendation be?" She hesitated, clearly understanding the implications of the question. "For clients with their risk profile and income documentation, I would recommend a smaller modification focused on payment deferrals and term adjustments, not the comprehensive restructuring your father is requesting." "Then that's what we offer them. Standard business practices, standard risk assessment, standard loan terms." "Are you sure? I mean, they are your parents." "That's exactly why I need to treat them like any other clients. Personal relationships and business decisions don't mix well, as we've already discovered." After Patricia left, I sat staring out my office window at the January afternoon traffic, feeling the weight of decisions that would affect my family's future. I could easily approve the loans Dad was requesting. My company was successful enough to absorb the risk And keeping my parents financially secure would eliminate ongoing stress for everyone involved. But doing so would perpetuate the unhealthy dynamic that had created our current crisis. My parents would remain dependent on my financial intervention while maintaining the illusion of independence. They would continue making decisions without fully understanding their consequences, knowing that I would quietly manage the problems that resulted. Friday morning brought an unexpected development that forced the issue to a head. Kevin called me at work, his voice tight with anxiety that reminded me of childhood moments when he'd been caught in situations beyond his ability to handle. "Lisa, you need to know what happened yesterday. Dad went to see Pastor Martinez about the mortgage situation." My stomach clenched. What exactly did he tell Pastor Martinez? "He asked the pastor to mediate between you and them. He said there was a family conflict that was affecting their financial security, and he wanted church intervention to resolve it." I closed my eyes, imagining Dad sitting in Pastor Martinez's office, laying out our family's private business, to the same man whose opinions had led to my exclusion from their New Year's party. The irony was staggering. My parents had been so concerned about what their pastor thought of my lifestyle choices that they'd excluded me from family celebrations. Now they were asking that same pastor to help them resolve problems that had resulted from their decision. How did Pastor Martinez respond? He told Dad that family conflicts should be resolved through prayer and communication, not financial manipulation. He said it sounded like Dad was trying to use emotional pressure to get business favors from you, and that wasn't consistent with Christian values. Kevin's report left me speechless. Pastor Martinez, the man whose traditional values had supposedly required my exclusion from family events, had recognized that my parents were trying to leverage family relationships for financial advantage. The moral authority they'd used to justify rejecting me was now pointing out the ethical problems with their approach to our crisis. What did Dad say to that? He got defensive and started explaining about how successful you are and how you should want to help family. Pastor Martinez apparently cut him off and said that children don't owe their parents financial support, especially when the parents have damaged the relationship through their own choices. The conversation Kevin described represented a complete reversal of the moral framework my parents had been using to justify their behavior. Pastor Martinez wasn't supporting their position or validating their choices. Instead, he was challenging them to take responsibility for the consequences of their actions. "Kevin, how are Mom and Dad handling this feedback?" "Not well. Dad came home angry and embarrassed. Mom's been crying off and on since yesterday. They both keep saying they don't understand how everything got so complicated so quickly." But it wasn't complicated. It was actually quite simple. My parents had made decisions based on what they thought other people wanted them to do, without considering the impact on their family relationships. When those decisions created problems, they'd tried to use emotional manipulation and family obligation to solve them. The complications arose from their refusal to acknowledge the direct connection between their choices and their consequences. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I called Dad's cell phone directly, ready to have the conversation we'd been avoiding since his visit to my house. "Lisa?" His voice carried surprise and what sounded like relief. "I'm so glad you called. Dad, Kevin told me about your meeting with Pastor Martinez. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what's happening with our family and your mortgage situation. Can you come over? Your mother really wants to see you, and we need to discuss this face to face." "I'll come over, but David's coming with me. If we're going to rebuild our family relationships, it needs to include everyone, not just the people you're comfortable with." A long pause followed, and I could almost hear Dad's internal struggle between his desire to resolve our crisis and his discomfort with the conditions I was setting. "All right," he said finally. "Come over whenever you want. We'll be here." David and I arrived at my parents' house Saturday afternoon, parking behind the same pickup truck that had sat in our driveway a week earlier, the modest ranch home looked smaller than I remembered. Its paint slightly faded, and its landscaping showing signs of deferred maintenance that probably reflected Dad's business struggles. Mom opened the door before we could knock, her face showing the strain of the past week. She'd obviously been crying recently, and her usual careful attention to appearance had been abandoned in favor of an old sweater and jeans that emphasized how much weight she'd lost during this crisis. "Mija," she said, reaching for me with tentative arms, as if uncertain whether physical affection was still welcome. I hugged her briefly, feeling the fragility in her embrace. "Hi, Mom. You remember David?" "Of course. David, thank you for coming. I know this situation has been difficult for you too." David's response was gracious and warm, exactly the kind of respectful courtesy he'd always shown my parents. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm hoping we can work through this together. Lisa's family is important to both of us." We gathered in the living room where I'd spent countless childhood hours, the familiar furniture and family photos creating a surreal backdrop for what felt like the most important conversation our family had ever had. Dad sat in his usual recliner, Mom perched nervously on the edge of the sofa. David and I settled together on the love seat that had been my favorite reading spot as a teenager. "I want to start by apologizing," Mom said before anyone else could speak. "What we did with the New Year's party was wrong. We were scared and confused, and we made a decision that hurt you terribly. I've been sick about it ever since." "Mom, I appreciate the apology, but I need to understand what you were actually scared of. What did you think would happen if David and I attended your party?" Mom looked at Dad, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Dad cleared his throat and answered for both of them. "We were afraid that Pastor Martinez and some of the church families would judge us for having an unmarried couple at a family celebration. We were afraid that the Hendersons and other potential business clients would see us as the kind of family that doesn't uphold traditional values. We were afraid that people would think we approve of cohabitation because we include you in family events." "And how did that fear justify excluding your daughter from a family tradition she'd participated in for over 20 years? "It didn't," Mom said quietly. "There was no justification. We let our anxiety about other people's opinions override our love for you, and that was inexcusable." David leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but direct. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, I want you to know that Lisa and I have been talking about getting engaged. We're not casually living together or avoiding commitment. We're building a life together with the intention of making it permanent." This revelation clearly surprised both my parents. Mom's eyes widened, and Dad's expression shifted from discomfort to something that looked like hope. "You're getting engaged?" Mom asked. "We're planning to, yes. But we wanted to take our time and make sure we were making the decision for the right reasons, not because of outside pressure or social expectations." "Ah, that's wonderful news," Dad said, genuine pleasure evident in his voice. "When were you planning to announce it?" "We weren't planning to announce it," I said firmly. "We were planning to live our lives authentically and let our families be part of that journey if they could accept us as we are. But when you decided that our current relationship status was embarrassing enough to exclude us from family events, it became clear that acceptance was conditional on meeting your standards rather than unconditional love." The conversation continued for over 2 hours, covering topics we'd avoided for years. My parents' financial struggles and their embarrassment about needing help, their anxiety about social judgment, and their confusion about how to balance family loyalty with community expectations. My own frustration with conditional acceptance and my desire to be included in family celebrations without having to edit myself for their comfort. Gradually, a clearer picture emerged of how we'd arrived at this crisis. My parents had been struggling financially for years, but their pride had prevented them from asking for help directly. When I'd begun quietly managing their mortgage problems, they'd experienced relief without understanding the source. Meanwhile, their anxiety about social judgment had grown as their financial insecurity increased, making them more sensitive to perceived criticism from community members. The New Year's party exclusion hadn't been about genuine moral convictions or deeply held family values. It had been about two people under enormous stress, making desperate attempts to control their image and secure their financial future. They'd sacrificed their relationship with me because they'd believed it was necessary to maintain relationships with people who might provide business opportunities or social validation. The irony, I said as our conversation wound down, is that the daughter you excluded from your party to impress potential clients is the same daughter who's been keeping you from losing your house. You were so worried about what other people thought of your family that you damaged your relationships with the people who actually matter. We know that now, Dad said quietly. Pastor Martinez made it very clear that we'd gotten our priorities backwards. He said that families who sacrifice relationships for appearances usually end up with neither. So what happens now? Mom asked. Can you forgive us? Can we find a way to rebuild what we've damaged? David and I exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that comes from truly knowing someone. We'd discussed this possibility during the drive over, trying to identify what conditions would need to be met for genuine reconciliation to be possible. I can forgive you, I said. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, and rebuilding trust takes time and consistent behavior change. If you want David and me to be part of family celebrations going forward, we need to be, included as we are, not as edited versions of ourselves that meet other people's approval. And regarding the mortgage situation, David added, Lisa needs to be able to maintain professional boundaries between her business relationships and family relationships. You can work with her company for financial services, but the decisions need to be based on standard business practices, not family obligations. Dad nodded slowly. Patricia explained that to me when I met with her. She said you would treat us fairly, but not differently from other clients with similar financial situations. That's right. Martinez Financial Solutions can help you. Restructure your debts and establish more sustainable payment plans. But within the same parameters we'd offer any clients with your risk profile and income documentation. Will that be enough to keep the house? Mom asked, anxiety evident in her voice. Patricia believes so, yes. You'll need to make some lifestyle adjustments and possibly consider downsizing in a few years. But immediate foreclosure isn't EI. Concern if you work with our loan servicing department consistently. As we prepared to leave, Mom hugged me again. This time with the fierce intensity I remembered from childhood moments when she'd been truly worried about my well-being. I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished, Mija. I'm proud of your business. And I'm proud of the woman you've become. And I'm proud that you found someone who loves you the way David does. I should have been saying that all along instead of worrying about what other people thought. I know, Mom, and I love you too. We just need to figure out how to love each other without conditions and expectations that make everyone miserable. The drive home was quiet, both David and I processing the emotional intensity of the afternoon. As we pulled into our driveway, David reached over and took my hand. How do you feel about how that went? Hopeful, I think. It felt like the first honest conversation we've had as adults. Whether they can actually follow through on the insights they had today remains to be seen, but at least we've established a foundation for rebuilding. And you're comfortable with the mortgage arrangement? Treating them like any other clients? More than comfortable. It's the only way this can work long term. Family relationships and business relationships need clear boundaries, or nobody benefits from either one. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the strange journey our family crisis had taken. What had begun as a devastating rejection had become an opportunity for honest communication and boundary setting. The parents who had excluded me from their celebration to maintain appearances had been forced to confront the gap between their stated values and their actual behavior. The daughter they'd taken for granted had revealed power they'd never imagined, but had chosen to use that power for healing rather than revenge. Monday morning brought a text from Kevin that made me smile. Mom's already planning Easter dinner and specifically asked me to make sure you and David know you're invited. She said she wants to cook all your favorite foods and doesn't care what anyone thinks about who's welcome at the table. Change would be gradual, and setbacks were certainly possible. But for the first time in years, I felt like my parents and I were building a relationship based on authenticity rather than performance, on mutual respect rather than conditional acceptance. The crisis that had threatened to destroy our family connections had instead created opportunities for deeper understanding and more honest communication. The daughter who had been excluded from one family celebration was already being invited to the next one, but on completely different terms. Terms that honored who we all actually were, rather than who we thought we needed to be for other people's approval. 6 months later, I stood in my parents' backyard, watching Dad carefully tend to the vegetable garden he'd planted in early spring. The rows of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs were thriving under his attention, a testament to both his gardening expertise and his newfound focus on activities that brought him genuine satisfaction rather than just potential income. The landscaping business had undergone significant changes since our family crisis in January. After working with Patricia to restructure their mortgage and establish a more sustainable debt management plan, my parents had been forced to take a hard look at their finances and make some difficult decisions about their lifestyle and business operations. Dad had downsized his commercial landscaping operation, letting go of contracts that required expensive equipment rentals and focusing instead on residential maintenance work that he could handle with existing tools and transportation. The reduced overhead meant lower gross income, but higher profit margins and significantly less stress. More importantly, it meant Dad could be selective about clients, working with people who valued his expertise rather than just seeking the lowest bid. "The Hendersons called again yesterday," Dad mentioned as he adjusted a tomato steak, his tone neutral rather than the anxious excitement such calls had once generated. "They want a quote for their new office complex landscaping." I looked up from the herb bed where I was helping Mom harvest basil for dinner. "Are you interested in taking on a project that size?" "Not really. It would require subcontracting work I can't handle myself, renting equipment I can't afford to buy, and dealing with the kind of timeline pressures that made me miserable for years." I told them I'd recommend some other companies that specialize in commercial projects. The change in Dad's attitude toward business opportunities represented a fundamental shift in how he understood success and security. Instead of chasing every potential contract, regardless of its impact on his well-being or family relationships, he was making choices based on what actually served his long-term interests. Mom emerged from the kitchen carrying a pitcher of iced tea and glasses for everyone, her face showing none of the strain and anxiety that had marked the months leading up to our New Year's crisis. The financial restructuring had provided breathing room, but more importantly, the honest conversations about their situation had relieved the emotional burden of trying to maintain appearances they couldn't afford. "David's running late?" she asked, settling into one of the patio chairs Dad had built from reclaimed wood. "He got caught up in a project meeting, but he'll be here before dinner. He's bringing dessert from that bakery you like downtown." The easy inclusion of David in our family plans still felt remarkable to me. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it represented such a complete reversal from the anxiety and exclusion that had characterized our relationships just months earlier. My parents now asked about David's work projects, remembered details about his family, and included him in their planning as naturally as they included Kevin and me. Kevin emerged from the house carrying his laptop, settling at the patio table where he'd been working on his latest freelance project. After years of struggling to find direction, he'd finally discovered a talent for web design and digital marketing that allowed him to work from home while contributing to household expenses. The arrangement benefited everyone, giving Kevin meaningful work and income while providing companionship for Mom and Dad as they adjusted to their scaled-back lifestyle. "I finished the website for Martinez Financial Solutions' new community lending program," he announced, turning his laptop screen toward me. "What do you think?" I examined his work, impressed by the clean design and clear navigation that made complex financial information accessible to potential borrowers. Kevin had inherited Dad's attention to detail and Mom's organizational skills, channeling them into digital design work that showcased abilities we'd never realized he possessed. "This looks professional and user-friendly. I think it'll be perfect for reaching the demographic we're targeting." The community lending program represented Martinez Financial Solutions' latest evolution, focusing on first-time homebuyers and small business owners who didn't qualify for traditional bank financing. It was work that felt meaningful and socially beneficial, helping families achieve stability while generating reasonable returns for the company. Patricia had initially expressed concerns about the program's risk profile, but our success rate had exceeded expectations. By focusing on borrowers with strong character references and realistic business plans rather than just credit scores and income documentation, we'd discovered an underserved market of reliable clients who simply needed more flexible lending criteria. "The Martinez family is becoming quite the business dynasty," Mom observed with obvious pride. "Lisa's growing her financial services company, Kevin's building his design business, and even Roberto's landscaping work is more successful now that he's focused on quality over quantity." The comment highlighted something that had surprised all of us during these months of rebuilding our relationships. When we'd stopped trying to impress other people and started focusing on authentic success, we'd all discovered capabilities and opportunities that had been hidden by our previous anxieties and misplaced priorities. David arrived as the sun was setting, carrying not just dessert, but also a bottle of champagne, and an expression that suggested he had news to share. After greeting everyone and complimenting Dad on the garden's progress, he pulled me aside with barely contained excitement. "The Portland project got approved," he said, referring to a sustainable engineering initiative he'd been developing for months. "They want me to relocate for 2 years to oversee the implementation." My heart sank slightly, even as I recognized the professional opportunity this represented for him. "That's incredible, David. You've worked so hard on that proposal." "There's more. They're structuring it as a consulting arrangement rather than permanent relocation, which means I could potentially commute and spend part of each month here. And they've indicated that if the Portland project succeeds, they'd want me to develop similar programs in other cities, which could mean opportunities for us to travel together." The conversation continued as we rejoined my family for dinner, David explaining the project details while my parents asked thoughtful questions about his work and career goals. The acceptance and interest they showed felt natural now, but I remembered the awkward formality that had characterized such interactions just a year earlier. As we lingered over dessert and champagne, Kevin raised his glass for an impromptu toast. To family relationships that survived their worst crisis and came out stronger on the other side. To second chances and honest conversations, Mom added. To learning that authenticity matters more than appearances, Dad contributed. To partnerships that support each other's dreams, David concluded, looking directly at me with an expression that made my heart race. And to discovering that the people who love you unconditionally are worth more than any amount of conditional approval from strangers, I finished, raising my own glass to complete our circle. After dinner, David and I walked through the neighborhood where I'd grown up, past houses that had once seemed imposing and impressive but now looked modest and familiar. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine and barbecue smoke, sounds of children playing in yards and families gathering on porches for the kind of ordinary moments that constitute the real substance of life. Lisa, there's something else. I need to tell you about the Portland opportunity, David said as we paused at the corner where the old elementary school playground was visible through chain-link fencing. What's that? Before I give them my final answer, I wanted to discuss something with you. Something I've been thinking about since our New Year's Eve celebration. He stopped walking then, turning to face me with an expression that was both nervous and determined. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box that made my breath catch in my throat. Lisa Martinez, You are the strongest, most principled, most accomplished woman I've ever known. You've shown me what it means to build something meaningful through hard work and integrity. You've taught me that authentic relationships are worth fighting for, even when the fight is difficult and painful. He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, the diamond catching streetlight in a way that made it sparkle like captured starlight. I want to build a life with you that honors both of our dreams and supports both of our careers. I want to face whatever challenges come our way as partners who choose each other every day, not because it's expected or convenient, but because what we have together is worth protecting and nurturing. The proposal was everything I could have hoped for, personal and thoughtful rather than performative, focused on our actual relationship rather than societal expectations about romance and marriage. But more than that, it represented the kind of authentic commitment we'd been building toward naturally, without pressure from external sources or artificial timelines. David Chen, yes. Absolutely yes. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The family crisis that had threatened to tear apart our relationships had instead forced conversations that revealed deeper truths about love, acceptance, and the difference between conditional and unconditional support. The parents who had once excluded me from family celebrations because of my relationship with David were now celebrating our engagement with genuine joy and enthusiasm. The boyfriend who had been deemed unsuitable for their social circle was now being welcomed as a son-in-law who brought out the best in their daughter. We returned to my parents' house to share our news, finding them still sitting on the patio with Kevin, enjoying the cool evening air and continuing conversations about family, business, and future plans. The excitement and congratulations that greeted our announcement felt wholehearted and unqualified, free from the anxiety and judgment that had once clouded such moments. "When are you thinking about the wedding?" Mom asked, her eyes bright with tears of happiness. "We haven't discussed specifics yet," I replied. "But we want something that reflects who we actually are rather than what other people expect. Something intimate and meaningful rather than elaborate and impressive." "Whatever you decide, we'll support it completely," Dad said firmly. "We've learned that your happiness matters more than anyone else's opinions about how you should live your life." The conversation continued late into the evening, filled with the kind of easy intimacy that characterized healthy family relationships. We discussed David's career opportunity, potential wedding plans, Kevin's growing design business, and my parents' contentment with their simplified lifestyle. Around midnight, as David and I prepared to leave, Mom pulled me aside for a private moment in the kitchen where she'd spent so many hours preparing meals that brought our family together. "Mija, I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become and the life you've built. Not just your business success, but your integrity and your courage to live authentically even when it was difficult. Thank you, Mom. That means everything to me." I also want to apologize again for the mistakes we made earlier this year. We let fear and insecurity damage our relationship with you, and we almost lost something precious because we were worried about things that didn't actually matter. Mom, we've all learned from that experience. What matters now is that we're building something better together. She hugged me tightly, the kind of fierce maternal embrace that communicates love more effectively than any words could manage. "I love you, Mija, and I love David, and I love the life you're creating together. Never doubt that." The drive home that night felt like a celebration of everything we'd overcome and everything we were building toward. David and I talked about practical matters like coordinating our careers and planning a wedding, but underneath those logistics was a deeper sense of satisfaction about having relationships that could withstand honesty and emerge stronger from conflict. A month later, I found myself sitting in my office reviewing quarterly reports that showed Martinez Financial Solutions continuing to grow and thrive. The community lending program was exceeding all expectations. The traditional mortgage business remained stable and profitable, and our reputation in the industry continued to attract both clients and talented employees. Patricia knocked on my door with her quarterly servicing report, including updates on accounts that required executive attention. Near the bottom of her list was a note about the Martinez family mortgage, indicating that payments had been current for 6 consecutive months, and that the modified payment plan was working well for all parties involved. "Any concerns with that account?" I asked, maintaining the professional distance we'd established. "None at all. They've been model borrowers since the restructuring. Mr. Martinez even sent a thank you card to our office staff, thanking them for their patience and professionalism during the modification process." The success of our professional arrangement with my parents validated the boundaries we'd established between family relationships and business relationships. They were receiving appropriate financial services without special treatment, and I was able to maintain professional standards without compromising family connections. That evening, David and I hosted a dinner party at our house, celebrating his acceptance of the Portland consulting arrangement and our engagement with friends who had supported us through various challenges and transitions. The guest list included Kevin, who had become the family member David was closest to, my parents, who were adjusting well to their new role as enthusiastic future in-laws, and several couples from our social circle who represented the kind of authentic relationships we valued. As we gathered around our dinner table, sharing food and conversation and laughter that came from genuine affection rather than social obligation, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed since that devastating phone call in December. The daughter who had been excluded from her family's New Year's celebration was now hosting engagement parties where everyone was welcome exactly as they were. The parents who had prioritized appearances over authenticity were now focused on supporting their children's actual happiness rather than managing their public image. The family relationships that had seemed broken beyond repair had been rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect and unconditional acceptance. Kevin raised his glass as we finished dinner, proposing a toast that captured the essence of our transformation: to learning that the people who matter will love you for who you are, and the people who don't love you for who you are don't actually matter. To families that choose love over fear, Mom added. To building lives that reflect our values rather than other people's expectations, Dad contributed. To partnerships that make everything else possible, David concluded, squeezing my hand under the table. As our guests departed and we cleaned up the remnants of our celebration, I found myself thinking about the woman I'd been a year earlier. Someone who had accepted conditional love as normal, who had worked tirelessly to earn approval that was constantly being redefined, who had hidden parts of herself to avoid conflict and maintain family harmony. The crisis that had forced us to confront these unhealthy patterns had been painful and frightening, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes relationships need to be broken down completely before they can be rebuilt on healthier foundations. Sometimes people need to face the consequences of their choices before they can make different ones. The final irony of our story was that my parents had gotten everything they'd actually wanted, just not in the way they'd expected. They had financial security, thanks to the mortgage modifications that allowed them to keep their home. They had family relationships that brought them genuine joy rather than constant anxiety. They had the respect of their community, earned through authentic integrity rather than performed respectability. Most importantly, they had learned the difference between conditional and unconditional love, between relationships based on fear and relationships based on trust. The daughter they had briefly lost through their own choices had been restored to them, along with a son-in-law who enriched their family rather than threatening it. As David and I settled into bed that night, my engagement ring catching moonlight from our bedroom window, he asked the question that had become our evening ritual during these months of planning our future together. "What made you happiest today?" "Watching our families blend so naturally," I replied. "Seeing Mom and Dad interact with your sister like she's already family. Realizing that we're not just getting married, we're creating a new kind of family. Structure based on choice and affection rather than obligation and tradition." "And what are you most grateful for?" That we survived the worst crisis our family relationships have ever faced and came out stronger on the other side. That we learned to love each other without conditions or limitations. That we built something real together that can withstand honesty and conflict and still emerge more beautiful than before. The mortgage extension that had started this whole journey had been resolved months earlier, replaced by a sustainable payment plan that served everyone's interests appropriately. But the real resolution had been much more profound than financial restructuring. It had been the discovery that authentic relationships require courage, that unconditional love is worth fighting for, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. The woman who had been banned from her parents' New Year's party had canceled much more than their mortgage extension. She had canceled the entire framework of conditional acceptance that had governed their family relationships for years. In its place, she had built something better, something based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than performance and approval. As I drifted off to sleep that night, surrounded by the life David and I had built together and secure in relationships that celebrated rather than merely tolerated who we actually were, I felt profound gratitude for the crisis that had forced these changes. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that happens to you. Sometimes being excluded from the life you thought you wanted creates space for the life you actually need. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.